Well, Charles, we've got a special segment now with a very good old friend of mine, Lee Stranahan. Lee, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great
on the comfy couch. It's very comfortable.
Glad you like it.
It is. It's cushy.
Now, this is the first time, Lee, that you and Charles have been together in a segment.
Yeah, we've
is
never
that
met
correct?
before, actually. Yeah,
I've seen your name around in your work.
Same here, of course. Yeah.
And it's a real treat, actually, to meet you in person. And what I'd like to focus on a little bit is I've had, I'm not a journalist, actually. I'm an investor who's dabbling in exposing complex frauds, and that's brought me into contact with many, many journalists around the world.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've experienced, particularly in the last year or so, is my interactions, not simply with RT and Sputnik, but with the state TV in Russia, many different channels, is the professionalism of their journalists. That they're actually, when they come to me, they're trying to get to the bottom of a specific issue. And very often what they'll do is they'll interview me, and then they'll put together work with 2 or 3 other people and splice it all together and give really balanced, old-fashioned, great reporting. So when I saw people attacking you, for your work, it seemed extremely unfair, and I wanted to make sure that our viewers had a chance to hear your story.
Well, part of it is, I had no problem when they offered me the job. Number one, I host a radio show called Fault Lines with Nixon Stranahan, my partner Garland. Nixon on the show is a progressive. He's quit the Democrat Party, but he was a Sanders supporter. And I like the idea of that format of a Hannity and Combs style format. But Hannity and Combs actually Crossfire's the other analog. Crossfire was a lot of yelling.
Right.
We don't really do that, although occasionally Garland will get me upset. He's better natured than I am. And but Garland's a great partner, and we have a really wide variety of guests. We're the only show I know where we'll get someone from Code Pink followed by James O'Keefe or something.
Right, that's great.
And I do think that's great because people are so inside their own media show. But anyway, they offered me the job because I'd wanted to do radio. I'd quit Breitbart, and I had no problem going to work for Russia because since I went to Beirut, Lebanon in 2013, I saw that the U.S. was on the wrong side of the Syrian conflict. Bashar al-Assad is fighting jihadist Islamist terrorists.
Right.
Period. That's who he's fighting. And I was like, and this is before Russia was really pulled into it, but I'm like, wow, we got this wrong. And so I've been trying to tell that story for 5 years now. So, but the first question I had for him was, will I be able to do outside work, which I could never do when I was at Breitbart. I was at Breitbart for 6 years on and off. Could never do, they wouldn't let me do interviews. I couldn't have done this. Let's just be clear. Breitbart, if I'd said, they wouldn't have let me do this interview. So they had no restrictions on outside work. And they don't tell me what to say. And you got 2 people, Garland and I, Garland's retired law enforcement. He doesn't need the job, if that makes sense.
Sure.
He likes it, but he's got a pension. He's got another radio show. So either one of us, if they were like, okay, well, you have to say this, I'd be like, okay, no, I don't actually.
That's right.
I can go do other stuff. And so they don't have any control over it. And I was at this Alex Jones event, we were talking to Jason. Jason was at the Alex Jones event, and this guy started Russia, Russia, Russia. I just said to him, can you dispute anything I've said, or is it just that I work for Russia? And it's a logical fallacy,
right,
to dismiss a fact because of the origin of the fact. Now, it does help when you know somebody's lying.
Right.
Then it's helpful to go, gee, why does this one source always lie? And then you can trace it back and go, gee, they're paid by Soros or whoever.
Right, exactly. Or Media Matters.
Or Media Matters, or who's paid by Soros.
Right.
Same thing.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's then helpful to go, oh, okay, this organization is really it claims to be a nonpartisan, non-political organization, but really it's funded by open societies. But once you determine they're lying, but that's it. Only after they've determined, because otherwise it doesn't matter. CNN reports the truth all the time.
Right.
But like the weather for like if they say the Yankees beat the Red Sox.
You want to check that.
Well, no, I don't. No, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Like CNN, people do this. Every news source you hate gets stories right day in and day out. But where they get them wrong is with the broad narrative.
Right.
You have to understand how they lie. It's not by lying 100% of the time. No news organization, nobody, and very few, unfortunately, tell the truth all the time either. And so it's very helpful to know, because I have a background. I was a Democrat. I had a background in the left, and I did work for Move On, and I understand that. I understand how the left lies, and I understand at this point how the right lies, and it's helpful to factor that in and go, well, this is the way they're deceptive. Just a simple example of how the right lies. It's an easy example. There's a long-standing libertarian tradition of being against the UN.
Right.
And the argument there is we shouldn't be in the UN because they're going to pull us into foreign entanglements. Now you have people like Nikki Haley at the UN who says she's against the UN. So a lot of libertarian-leaning conservatives go, oh, I'm with her. She's right. But her reason for being against the UN is that they might stop the U.S. from a foreign entanglement. So it's the exact opposite. So that's an example. But a lot of people get fooled because they go, well, she's against, it's that enemy of the enemy is my friend thing.
Right.
It's not really true. That's not a good standard to use. And so that's just one example. But the left lies too all the time, and I expose that as well. And so they're great. They've been great at Sputnik. They don't tell me what to do. They treat me better than Breitbart ever did.
Really?
Much noticeably. Stupid example. I'm diabetic. My wife and I have had 7 kids. We got 5.
7,
right?
wow.
I never got insurance when I was at Breitbart.
Really?
Never, ever once. So, and they didn't pay me. I used to be a graphic artist. That's how I know Jason for 20 years, is that I was a graphic artist, a 3D animator. I worked on Access Hollywood for 5 years.
Wow.
I was a graphic
You're a
artist.
man of many tricks.
And I was making at Access twice as much money as I made when I went into journalism later. So in other words, I got into journalism in my 40s, and my wife was like, what are you doing? Because I took a
big cut, yeah.
A big cut, but I'm good at it, and I thought it was important, and blah, blah, blah. But zero. Breitbart was paying me half of what I was making, and no insurance. Sputnik, so people said, well, you're on the Russian payroll. I said, I'm not just on the payroll, I'm on the benefits package as well. I'm on the, I get 2 weeks paid vacation, and
Do you have a pension?
And I don't think so. I
Well,
don't think
also,
so.
Breitbart was giving you kind of, flexibility problems after Steve Bannon left. They didn't want you going in the press briefing.
No, when Steve Bannon was there, Steve was the one who was really.
He was your advocate, wasn't he?
Yes and no. Steve was very complimentary about my work as a journalist, but Steve was the guy you had to ask, hey, can I do this media appearance? And Steve's notorious for what? No. Boom. No. You can't do that. So like this appearance that I did with Alex.
Yeah.
When I'm getting sued, that was the other problem with Breitbart. I say they treated me badly. I got sued over a story that was published in Breitbart that I did nothing wrong on.
The Chobani.
No, not that. I know I didn't get sued over that. It was by Brett Kimberlin. It's a long story. It was a Breitbart story. They never helped.
Wow. And Alex Jones is basically paying for the legal defense.
I have a separate lawyer, but Bannon never would have let me do a press conference with Alex in a million years. Never would have let me do a press.
It was a really good press conference.
Yeah, I thought it was too. And once again, Alex didn't restrict me. So I have very little rules on that stuff. I don't like people to tell me what to say. right? I don't need to.
Good luck with that.
Reminds me of
Yeah, but
somebody
you know
I
what I mean.
know.
Yeah.
It reminds me of somebody I know.
That's right.
As a journalist, ultimately, you're in control of your own career in the fact that if you report something wrong, even if it's under pressure from the company, ultimately it's your name on the byline. And 10 years from now, the company may or may not be around, but it's still on your resume. And if you're like, well, they made me, no one accepts that.
Right.
So I realized when I started doing journalism 10 years ago, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for what I write. And therefore, I'm never going to do something, and I don't do it now. I never did it Breitbart. When I worked at Huffington Post, I'm proud of every piece I wrote at Huffington Post. I don't regret anything, really, that I wrote there. Same at Breitbart. Same when I leave Sputnik, because I'm just me.
Sure.
No matter where I work. And so, but now Breitbart was. On the other hand, Bannon was very complimentary. When I was serving as, Steve knew he could put me on a story, and I would bring home the groceries every time.
I know Steve. I mean, I wrote a few pieces for Breitbart just as a contributor. I've been on, when he was there, on the radio shows with him. And I agree, most people who get into, whether it's investment banking or running media companies, are not good at it, at managing.
Yes.
And what you're dealing with are very creative people who are, as you say, independent. They want to get to the facts themselves. They want to see the story themselves. They don't want some suit, whether it's an investment banker being told to do this deal or that deal, or in media, do that story or whatever. I did want to give a special shout out to two of your colleagues you haven't met, and I promise I will introduce you to them. There's a guy called...
You know more people than I do.
That's
Sputnik. It's true.
Yeah.
But
so one of them is an old line journalist named Martin Seif. He goes by Marty Seif. And I think for a long time he was the foreign editor at the Washington Times.
Okay.
He's from Northern Ireland. He's a Jewish faith. It puts him in a small minority in that area. But he is an old school journalist. For example, when he interviews me, he doesn't use a tape recorder. He uses white paper and a pen.
Wow.
To take notes.
Wow.
And but he does really thorough work. And then there's this fine woman who lives in some small town, but then commutes into Moscow, I think, named Ekaterina Blinova. And I'll put you in touch with both of them.
Yeah, that'd
they
be
do
great.
Outstanding work, not just on stuff with me, but all sorts of different topics, and they might be a resource for you.
Well, I have this theory. I mean, one of the ways I get stuff right is I try to lean against my biases.
That's smart.
And so for instance, we live in an era right now where everyone's talking about Russia for the last year. I would go out of my way to read Russian sources if I wanted to get the story right. And the reason why is not that I would trust Russia, but I want to get both sides. So you never, there's a reason in a trial, let's say, they let both sides talk. Because if anybody's ever watched a trial, one of the things that happens is you listen to the prosecution's case and you're like, oh, the guy sounds guilty. I don't know. It sounds like that's pretty good. Then you listen to the defense case and you're like, I don't know, maybe he's not guilty. And so very few people do that, I found, as consumers of journalism. If they go, well, here's the right-wing case and I'm right-wing, they just listen to that. Whereas it's always good to go, okay, Media Matters, I don't like them and I don't agree with them and I know they lie because they lied about me, but let me see what they're saying. Oh, and then let me try to run it down. And if they've got a point, like it actually helped me on the Benghazi story to figure out part of what was actually going in Benghazi. I ran down what Media Matters was saying. It's like, oh, okay. So I always try to be very, look at it. I think everybody should be, right now, when Russia's being demonized, everybody should listen to Russian media and take it skeptically and check it out. But what I found is everybody who thinks they know what's going on with Syria, almost everything they think is wrong.
No, I agree with you.
And so it's the same with Russia. They don't know. Even Bannon. Bannon's a smart guy. Steve Bannon is a
Very
smart guy.
Yeah.
He still is pissed about Russia from the Soviet Union.
I know.
And
I know.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm of a school that actually, in my entry into this, I started really in financial investigations. So
Yeah.
a lot of CNBC, Bloomberg, Fox
Yep.
Business kind of stuff, Wall Street Journal, Barron's, etc. But then I drifted into this whole with the Clinton Foundation, political fraud and campaign violations, corruption, etc. And in the last, I'd say, year and a half or 2 years actually, I found myself spending an enormous amount of time as a guest on progressive radio.
Yeah,
which is
right.
really I was chairman of the Yale Conservative Party when I was 19 years old.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
and which was a centrist conservative party, but nonetheless, you know,
But still, yeah.
to be
At Yale.
At Yale, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm 62, so that was back in 1975 or so.
Right.
But anyway, there's a wonderful woman named Utrice Lead, who's an experienced journalist. She used to be, I think, in charge of WBAI or here in New York, which is a far left-leaning radio station. I've been on WBAI with Randy Credico.
So yeah, Randy's great. We've had Randy in the show.
Yeah.
So 75, that was shortly after the New Haven Black Panthers trial.
Right. Yeah.
That was short. That was early, that was a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it was like 3 years
with the
earlier.
Erica Huggins.
Right.
But it was probably still. So shortly after Hillary Clinton was in Yale Law, where she worked with.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's actually very funny. There was a guy, and I forget which organization. It's a DC think tank. You know, who came and was talking in 2015 to the Monday meeting. I don't know if you've ever gone to that here in New York, which is an interesting gathering. And he was arguing then that American politics were going to shift and that elements on the far left and the right would actually start to agree on certain things, that the establishment was actually bringing the country down and we need to root out the corruption, forget the deep state, on and on and on. And he then said, you know, and I premised that on the experience that I had when I was at Yale, when there was an odd situation where there was an alliance that came together between progressives and conservatives to defeat a liberal. And and I walked up to the guy afterward. I said, "So what year did you graduate from Yale?" He said, 1980. And the guy looks at me and says, "Do you know anything about what I was just talking about?" I said, "Well, a little bit, because I did it. I was the person who did it."
Yeah, right.
And so I had been defeated by I ran for president, lost after I was chairman and of the political union, and they played a dirty trick on me. And I exposed it, but I lost. And then I said, I'm going to get these bastards who did that. And I put the coalition together. 3 conservative parties, 1 progressive. Back in the day when progressive meant more like Marxist.
Right,
and we came together and we defeated the liberal.
Well, even communism is, I mean, I have an alternate theory than I think a lot of people on this, which is when you look at populism, I have a site, populist.tv. So I've had to think a lot about what populism is. And populism is, in one sense, it's a politically neutral term. What I mean by that is, historically, if you look at the history of the populist, it applies to everybody from Huey Long to Donald Trump to Fidel Castro. Because there's no question whatsoever when Castro, if you look at it, if populism is anti-elitism, the Cuban Revolution was initially a revolution saying, look, these companies have too much power here and blah, blah, blah. And what happened was, and the communist revolution, again, it is a people's revolution. Now, what happens is, in my analysis, as soon as your solution becomes big government, it fails.
Right.
So even if your intent is, and Castro's interesting, because he was not a communist initially. His brother Raul was. But when Castro came to New York in the 50s and was on the Ed Sullivan show, they were asking him, were you a communist? And he was like, I don't know. No. And the people who became the anti-Castro people called Castro a traitor to the revolution. That tells me that they were upset when because it's true. All that group, Alpha 66 and Vincian and that whole group that was sort of involved in the Kennedy assassination too, when they look at it, they call Castro a traitor to the revolution. So in trying to look at history through the lens of populism. I kind of define it now even. My partner Garland is what I would call a big government populist. He's a populist. He's against the elites. He thinks the solution is single-payer health care or whatever. And I'm like, nope, never going to work. Always, as soon as you concentrate that much power, it's going to be co-opted. So that's my view. And looking at history through that lens and trying to go, okay, just because something's populism doesn't mean I'm going to agree with it.
Right.
It's anti-elitism, but trying to see where they went wrong, and trying to see, frankly, where it's gone wrong with Trump. And I think just clearly in foreign policy, I think it's gone way wrong. I think it's helpful. I think it's very helpful to try to look at it through an alternative lens. So I see more. So it's not surprising to me that progressives and a perfect example, and you know this in the investment world. 2007, we had the economy tank. What came out of that? The Tea Party came out of that.
Right.
And Occupy Wall Street
Right.
came out of that. They both see the problem. They're right about the problem. There's no solution to the problem, but they just had two very, very different.
I think there are solutions to the problem, actually. I have up on my website, because everybody has to do this, when somebody says, you're always criticizing everything, Charles, can you come up with a solution? So I have a 10-point plan, specifics of how we could get back on track. I think the one part of the largest economy in the world that has not been disrupted, the American economy, is government. When you look at the hard statistics on government, which are available through the National Income and Product Accounts tables online, we spend all in state, federal, local government over $6 trillion a year on government. $6 trillion.
Right.
It's preposterous.
Yes.
Right. And you look at that, and in the same way, and I'm not saying it works perfectly at all, that Amazon disrupted retail, and Craigslist and the social media types are just disrupting advertising and media. Corporate media, it should be possible with the tools that are out there to disrupt the existing form of government and not spend $6 trillion a year burning about $2 trillion.
You're 100% convinced you're right. Yeah. But there's having lived in D.C. now for a year.
Sorry to hear that.
What's that?
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting though. I never thought I'd live there, and as a journalist going to a place, I learned a lot in Beirut just because I was there, right? And so the thing I've learned in DC is I understand the swamp a lot better. Yeah. And what I tell people is the swamp is full of fabulous restaurants and great shopping.
Right.
Now, because if you hear a swamp, you go, well, who would want that? But then when you're in DC, it's full of pricey real estate, beautiful colonial homes in places like Alexandria. There is great shopping, great menswear shops. You can get Hermès ties and
before Manafort cleans them out.
Everything. That's right. But it's great. Now here's the problem: civil servants don't make that much money.
Right.
And then they retire on a pension. So if you go through and you're an FBI, even if you're a director of an FBI, these guys are making 150K a year. A guy like McCabe is making 100 something. That's not huge money. It's just not. Now, here's the other thing that happens. You got a wife.
Right.
And you have kids. Now you put in your 20 at the FBI, and your wife has friends, and they all live in Georgetown or Arlington or Gaithersburg or wherever. Your kids are in school. You're going to retire on a pension. And, okay, honey, we can move to Florida because that's all we can afford. We can't afford to stay here on my pension. And so here's what happens. Someone from a think tank calls you and goes, hey, we want you, or someone from a board.
Right, of course.
Right?
Mullen on General Motors board. Yeah.
That's right. Or someone from a startup. Hey, we're doing a cybersecurity startup.
Right.
And if you're on our board, I know you were making 150. We'll pay you 500 for being on the board. You got to go to a meeting once every 4 months. We got to be able to use your name on the letterhead. That's it. So these guys suddenly, or gals, are suddenly making $500,000, $1 million a year. And by the way, everybody in civil service knows that. Comey,
Sure.
who drifted in and out between going on the board of HSBC and coming out, these guys realize it. And so I'm 100% convinced that if you want to, and I'm a conservative in the sense that I'm not anti-military. I appreciate the people who serve in the military. I love the troops, et cetera, et cetera. But you got to stop there, because where I live in Arlington, I see McDonnell Douglas's building,
sure, yeah.
and it's super nice, and it's got Adirondack chairs out on the lawn, and that's what people think of this when they hear the swamp. If you don't live in D.C., until I saw it,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, I see. If you drain the swamp, McDonnell Douglas has to lose the Adirondack chairs and the glass and steel building with the big logo. I'm like, oh, that's where all the money is. And to my mind, you gotta start. It's very tricky for conservatives because they like the military and they get sucked in. But I see the think tanks, and they're poison. They really are. So that's.
I'm agreeing with you violently. I mean, I think as far as the military is concerned, I've had some experience with United Technologies and, of course, exposing GE.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is all about contracts that are completely off the market. They're an ability to,
Yes.
have stable revenue at corporate level.
That's right.
And a mutual back scratching association. But that's only $800 billion a year, which is a lot of money to spend on our military. And
Right.
I'm a numbers guy. You look around the world. How many nations spend $100 billion a year on military?
Right.
Nobody.
No, right. Nobody.
Only we spend $800 billion. Anyway,
right.
so there's clearly fat there, clearly.
Yeah.
And it's clearly a post-retirement from the military
Yeah.
fraternity, sorority.
Yep.
But in addition to that, there are a long list of companies, Chemnonics, a whole bunch of companies like that get these no-bid contracts to provide social services around the world or inside this
Yes.
country.
Yeah.
Because again, we spend $6 trillion a year. Military's $800 billion. So
Yes.
we got a lot of fat beyond the military too.
Right. Yes.
That needs to
Yeah.
get cut out there.
But to me, it's the same. So the USAID, what I just said about the civil servants, and by the way, it's the FBI. I mean, CrowdStrike were the people who did the
Sure.
work for the DNC. They have Sean Henry on there, former head of cybersecurity for the FBI. But I get it. I get it in a way that's not conspiratorial, it's human. And that's why I bring up the kids and the wife and all that, because that's the way real life works. You're 50, I'm in my 50s now, right? You're 50 something, you're looking at retirement. I get it. Your wife doesn't want to move to Phoenix, right? Which is where you could live no, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You could live affordably. You could live on an $80,000 pension affordably, and the kids are gone in a 2-bedroom apartment. But they're looking at it going, but her husband retired, and he's making $1 million
Yeah.
from the Atlantic Council and for doing nothing.
Google and giving them
Yeah,
money.
for Google, exactly right. And it's every branch. It's the bureaucratic. You could name USDA. I could just go down the list.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because I landed on the Clinton Foundation and on the World of Charities by
Yes.
accident.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you there's $5 trillion, $5 trillion sitting in all charities combined.
Yes.
And not many of it is, they do good work, but there's enough of it that by bringing the regulations for charities into the 21st century,
Right.
and making sure that a think tank is not used as you described,
Right.
to just
Right.
pay off somebody to get that you don't do that anymore. The beauty of this is that all these think tanks have been created. They've issued public, and charities, they've issued public statements that you can look at and find. You don't need the
990s
FBI.
and
You don't need
Yep.
the FBI to get it. I just recently exposed Media Matters. It's a complete fraud.
Oh yeah.
When you look at the paperwork, it is not, the Media Matters Action Network has never registered in New York as you need to register. It is not a charity at all. It is an
Right.
action organization. You're not allowed to do what they are doing. And I already reported them to New York State. And
Well, I'm familiar with David Horowitz, and
he's a good guy.
and David has said, I use 501c3s because he does, and they need to be gotten rid of. So I'm fine with some. I use them too. I have 501.
Why do they need to get rid of 501c3s?
I don't think they should be gotten rid of, but
Well,
they need to be regulated.
what he means is, as far as they go politically, In other words, 501c3s, it was set up to be like charity,
Right.
like
I know.
for heart disease or something, right? But they become, having worked somewhat in electoral politics and reported on it, here's the scam. It's the easiest scam in the world. You're supposed to have a Chinese firewall between, let's say, a 501c3 and a 527, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
A political organization,
Right.
501c3. But you could be an executive director at a 501c3, and you could also be in a 527. Now, you can't have a firewall in your head. So in other words, you're not supposed to coordinate, except everybody coordinates, and they all know how to do it.
But here's a trick. Here's a trick for you. That is technically true.
Yeah.
What is a 527?
It's like a. It's
527 is a political organization.
Right.
Then there's a 3 and there's a 4. And the difference is one's dark money. And so, do you know what everybody uses? And the answer is all of them. Everybody uses all of them. So a group like Media Matters, I'm sure they have a 3 and a 4.
Right, but here's a little trick for you.
Yeah.
When you focus on the charity itself, right,
Yes.
it must actually be organized
Right.
lawfully in every state where
Right.
it solicits, and it must operate lawfully. Right? It must.
Yeah.
By organized, you have to. On the day that you file your articles of incorporation, you got to make sure that the lawyers don't just do it, that you have a board meeting, that you have bylaws,
Right.
everything's right and proper.
Yes.
It must exist. Okay.
Yeah.
The media. What I'm telling you is the Media Matters Action Network doesn't exist as a legal entity.
Yeah,
Right.
that's interesting.
So they're screwed. You can't
Yeah.
coordinate with an organization that
If
doesn't.
they get busted, but the problem is hardly anybody gets
No, they are in the process
But-
of being busted.
good.
I assure you.
Good. But you know what I'm saying,
Right.
which is I guarantee if you looked at a lot of these, because it really is a game in DC. Media Matters is especially corrupt
Right.
because of their connections to.
So you just think 501c3s are being used for fraud pretty regularly?
Yeah. Everybody when they're used for political purposes. Here's what it is. You do it. We're an educational foundation or whatever, and we're a nonpartisan, and they never are.
Right.
And everybody on the right does it, and everybody on the left does it, and everybody who's a libertarian, and everybody who's a socialist, and everybody who uses these knows that they don't. The nonpartisan, non-political thing is just a laugh, and they actually do coordinate. And the way they coordinate is they have the same person who's on both. And once you see how it works, and by the way, and then they also coordinate with the media. So Media Matters, one of the other big dangers of Media Matters was operating, I was friends with people at Media, Eric Bollert and I. Eric Bollert wrote a book a few years ago when I was at Huffington Post called Bloggers in the Bus. He did a whole chapter about me. And Eric and I were friendly. And I started working with Andrew Breitbart on the Pigford Black Farmers story. And the first weekend, I interviewed Mike Espy, who's the former head of Ag
Right.
under Clinton. And Espy took me off camera. He said, hold up, stop recording. And he said, look, we know there's fraud in this thing. He said, we're trying to fix it on the second go around here, but we knew the first one was full of fraud. So I called Bollert up. And I said, hey, Eric, I know you hate Andrew Breitbart, but he's right on this Pigford thing. Mike Espy just pulled me off record to tell me they know it's full of fraud. I can't use it, but I'm letting you know you might want to pull back on. I don't want you to extend yourself.
Right.
Within 2 weeks, Media Matters calling me a racist for reporting on Pigford with Andrew Breitbart. Within 2 weeks.
Right.
So, and I tried to do Bollert a favor there by saying you guys are wrong. Now, subsequently, New York Times proved us right because I knew we were right.
Well, so the thing that's interesting here, I think the further
But they're really corrupt. That's
yeah.
my experience of Media Matters.
Well, and I think the further way they get around it is that by having not just Lois Lerner, she's the one we know about,
Right.
you know, over top of the tax exempt organizations unit in the IRS when she was for so long.
Yeah.
There are other scoundrels over top those various bits and pieces of the IRS and injustice. I don't know if you know this, but when there was an active FBI investigation of the Clinton Foundation from 2001 to 2005.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, you could see the William J. Clinton Foundation vault file, FBI vault file. It's
Right,
online.
right.
And it shows that it started by February of 2001, and that in January of 2002, guess who was the U.S. attorney leading the investigation? James Comey.
Oh, right, yes.
Who was the head of the FBI through that entire period? Robert Mueller from September
Yes.
2001.
Yep.
Who was the person at the Department of Justice who was in charge of tax fraud decisions? Rod Rosenstein.
Yeah.
And these idiots were there for 4 years looking at a file that I can see from the outside without a subpoena,
Right.
I can see just the public filings, a massive fraud. And they let it off.
And see, so in the 501c3s, here's the problem. Some of the stuff Lerner was investigating, like these Tea Party groups, were completely fraudulent. So there were groups, there were 501c3s that were formed that were, and I could point to them and show you,
Sure,
but
sure.
I've
Please do.
investigated it.
Please do.
Completely, they were scams, where they were ripping off people who were, like, basically, there's a group, this is the ballsiest thing I've ever heard of. This guy had a company that did reverse mortgages. Now, you know,
I know what those are, yeah.
So reverse mortgages are for old people who don't understand money,
Right.
right?
Just most of them.
Right, but correct,
Yeah.
right? So they're not a good deal for the
Right.
people involved. So he had a list of that. Here's the ballsy part. He named the company Glengarry. Now, if you know Mammoth
Read
at
Mammoth,
all,
right.
or have ever seen the movie, that is like pretty like I'm opening a scam company. So he got into the Tea Party thing because he had this big list. When you've got a list of old people who don't know money,
That's valuable.
That's-
You're a fraudster.
that's very valuable.
Well, I could take it a step further. There's a company called Info USA, and it is a publicly traded company.
Yep.
It routed over $2 million to the Clinton family from
Yeah.
2002 to 2008.
Yeah.
The guy who ran it was so crooked, Vinod Gupta, that he was kicked out. Investors came into this publicly traded company, kicked him out from being CEO. He was a big stockholder. He had
Wow.
like 29 country club memberships on a public company. Why you need 29?
Right,
who knows?
right.
You know, multiple corporate jets, insider dealing transactions. And what was Info USA all about? It was about selling those type of lists.
Yes.
They had a very valuable list of people who have Alzheimer's.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that
yes.
kind of stuff.
That's right.
Outrageous behavior.
It's completely outrageous.
You know?
Yes. But that's what happens. And so some of these Tea Party groups, and the one that I've written about is TeaParty.net Leadership Fund, which was started by the guy who I mentioned and stuff like that. And I'd written about it. If you're giving money to the Tea Party, you don't want your money going to Mitch McConnell. But I showed through the
Right.
501, I showed how they route the money, and you can just do the ins and outs. You can just look at where they get their donations, who their vendors are.
Right.
And this information is all public.
I've been asking this question for a while. 501c3s seem very abused. And this,
100%.
well, this lawsuit
Well-
that I'm under is because I've been exposing Robert David Steele's 501c3, and it's remarkably similar to your lawsuit, but I don't want to deflect to that if you still have more.
No. What I would say is that 501c3s, we have to be careful. There are 380,000 or
Right,
so
right.
of them, and there may be 50,000 that are a problem, but which is bad. But a lot of them are like the ones that I've been associated with, where they take the rules incredibly strictly, and it's their own money being given away,
Right.
and they do try to play by the rules. I take the point that there are.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm exposing the Clinton Foundation, and it's not just
Yes.
the lefties in the Clinton Foundation. We're pivoting today, actually, to begin focus on the Bushes.
Yes,
Because
right, which is a big factor with the Clinton. And here's the thing. It's a game that once people figure, and I'm really convinced by this with Clinton. Having read his biography, look, Bill Clinton to me is he's a fascinating American. Clearly, he's the smartest guy in Hope, Arkansas, like the smartest kid. But no, that's what he is. So imagine he's a smart kid.
What am I doing here?
Growing up in a horrible
Right.
family, I'm not
family,
judging him, but
yeah.
just like alcoholism and abuse and all sorts of stuff.
Cocaine.
And he's very bright, and he gets to Georgetown, where he studies under Carroll Quigley. And Quigley, that's very interesting. And Quigley, I could do an hour on Quigley and what he's, all of this stuff about philanthropic organizations saying they're doing good, yet having a secret political agenda.
Right.
Carroll Quigley exposed. And he exposed it going back to the 1800s with Cecil Rhodes.
Really?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
I got to read up on that. That's
So
really
it's fascinating. So this goes back to Rhodes and W.T. Stead and this group that Rhodes put together. Now, Rhodesia's named after him, and the Rhodes Scholarship. And Clinton is a Rhodes Scholar. I'm convinced that Clinton he studied under Quigley, who exposed all of this stuff, all these secret organizations that act like philanthropies. It's all the stuff we see with Soros and everything else.
And he said, I could do that.
That's exactly, I am 100% convinced.
I got to study that. That's
And his wife studied under Alinsky, who did the same thing. Right. Alinsky's a guy, I mentioned the Panthers. Sure. They're not dumb. The Panthers figured this out. Bill Ayers figured this out. All the 60s radicals figured out that running around blowing up your friends and getting shot at is less fun than having a 501c3. Right? And so they transitioned out of the violent phase and became community organizers. And
sure.
Elaine Brown, who was the head of the Black Panthers, she runs a 501c3 in Oakland right now. She's a community organizer in Oakland right now. All of them, if you go through, they all figured out the game. And Alinsky's one of those guys who figured out the game. Alinsky's whole deal was, look, cut your hair, put on a suit and tie,
right,
and you'll
go to Yale Law School.
And you'll go to Yale Law School, and you'll sure. work for. If you look at the Clintons' history, Clinton went from Hillary Clinton worked for Bernstein Truhaft in Berkeley when she was in Berkeley. When she moved to Berkeley, which is where her romance with Clinton bloomed. And Truhaft Bernstein was a notable communist. They were like explicitly,
sure,
unabashedly communist. She went from that to the First Lady of Arkansas, and in like 6 years, they're in Arkansas promoting the death penalty.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. Right.
How does that work? The way that works is they realize that if you're going to get elected in Arkansas, you better promote the death penalty. You're not going to get elected in Arkansas being a hippie. Yeah. So they change. So they're fascinating people to me.
Yeah. Well, so one of the tricks in the charity land that we've been exposing, Jason and I, on the show, the biggest trick in charity land is not looking at the books. It's you set up a charity and you say, we're going to do a charity appeal on this broadcast now. Let's try to raise $1 million. And we come back and we say, the next broadcast, we say, you know what, we're really successful. We raised $1.1 million.
Right.
The truth is we raised $1 billion.
Right.
And we steal the money before it gets to the charity. That's in essence what the Clintons have done, what the Bushes have done with their joint ventures with the Clintons.
Right.
And that is strictly forbidden. There's no gray area about that.
Right.
And the good news for all of that is that accounting firms have rendered opinions. And these accounting firms are big accounting firms that have a lot of insurance and money behind them, and we're going to go after them. We're going after the lawyers. We're going after the donors.
Yeah.
There's a big pot of money to get back for the American taxpayer.
Yeah,
big
that's great.
pot of money.
So I suppose what I meant to say was not that all 501c3s are scams, but scammers certainly seem drawn to the 501c3.
Yeah.
It is absolutely hilarious. I don't know if you ever watched Fawlty Towers.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Fawlty Towers has the episode where Basil Fawlty is trying to recruit the right sort of people to his hotel.
Right.
And this lord walks in.
Yeah.
And immediately Basil drops everything.
Yes.
And of course the lord is he's not a lord, he's a scam artist.
Right.
The American equivalent of that is you create a charity.
Right.
If you're, because if suddenly you're a philanthropist,
yes.
That you're not chasing money, you're not worried about your pension, you're giving money away. Ergo, you must be rich. And if you're rich, you must be successful, and therefore there must be something good about you. So by saying you're a philanthropist, you acquire this patina of respectability. Which, when you look at, for example, at what I've seen of Bill Gates, he was under assault,
Right. No.
and then he creates this charity, right? And it's run amok. His charity.
The organization I've looked at extensively reported on is Philanthropy Unbound. It's out of Hawaii. And that leads to a lot of fascinating stuff, including connections that group has. But with the Puna House School, which is where Obama went, and Pierre Omidyar.
What about Waldorf schools?
What's that?
Waldorf schools.
Well, this is not. I mean, there's people on the board of Philanthropy Unbound who are at the Puna House School. So this is all the Puna House School.
It's a bit old line private school.
Old line private school. The plantation owners and the kings, like the children of the Hawaiian kings, and the plantation owners would go there. And so the fact that Obama went there,
Suspicious.
it's fascinating. I don't know what it is. It's fascinating because he shouldn't have gone there. Does that make sense? You know what I mean.
I know. I went to a school here called Horace Mann. I don't know if you know Horace Mann School, but it's, it's similar. It's been in the news for bad reasons, but it's a similar approach to the school in Hawaii you're talking about.
Well, we were saying, like because I grew up in Western Massachusetts, we were talking about that. Phillips Exeter.
Sure. My brother went there.
Massachusetts ago. So Phillips Exeter right now, Phillips is a lot of Saudis and a lot of Middle Eastern, right? And so you get fascinating stuff by reading those alumni. I will say this. I have found fascinating stuff by reading alumni newsletters from some of these prep schools. So, and again, this tradition goes back, by the way, it does actually go back to the late 1800s with these Anglo-Americans, because it's very British. If you think about the prep school thing, that's a very British tradition.
I know.
It's not American. Right. It is, but not really. It's like elitist. It's a little too elitist for America, but it's part of that very British tradition. And so this Philanthropy Unbound in Hawaii, you can see when you look at their 990s that they gave money to open societies. So why would they do that? The reason they do that, I know why they did. They didn't tell me, but I can figure it out. The reason you do that is your ticket to the dance.
Sure.
Right? So if I want to start to make a splash in the world of philanthropy and I want to get known, right? It's like Hollywood. Jason and I both work in Hollywood. If you want to make a splash in Hollywood, just go in and buy a script for $1 million. Now suddenly everybody would be like, "Who the hell's this guy?"
You're a producer.
You'll be getting lunch with everybody, and the actors will want to know you because it'll make the trades, right? I bought a script. It doesn't make any difference what the script is. So when I saw them like giving money to, I'm like, well, open societies doesn't need your money.
Sorry, they gave money to Soros?
Yes.
That's nuts.
Yes, it's nuts until you go, oh, I see what they were doing. Because that's my theory. This is conjecture. I can't prove it. But it's the only thing that makes sense to me. Why would you do that?
Right.
I was like, the reason you do that is because if you gave $1 million check to George Soros, open societies.
You can bet, you can count that, and that's not going to happen.
But if you did, you would be having lunch with his son, and that buys you. That's your ticket.
Yeah,
that's your ticket to the dance. Whereas if you give $20 to move on, that will never happen.
Right.
And so this is the game.
Right. So actually, another game that's really interesting, I don't know how much you've gotten into, is if you're fortunate, like let's say you have 100 acres of land somewhere that you bought 30 years ago for $75,000.
Right,
Today it's worth $5 million.
Right,
let's say, whatever the numbers are. You give that to a charity, right? And if provided you have income, you can get a tax deduction on the difference between your costs.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And so you can do that with securities. You're a venture capitalist. You have Apple stock that's publicly traded for whatever that and you give that to a charity that you still control.
Yeah.
So so you control the stock. You take it from your personal pocket, you put it into the charity, you get money back from the feds if the state charges you income tax from your state in the city, but you still control the stock.
I have periodically wondered why I don't quit journalism and go into investment stuff, because after being, and I really mean
maybe
this,
you should.
After being I would make more money.
Might have more fun.
I would, yeah, maybe. I mean, I like doing, I like doing journalism. I think it's important. But we had this thing, the Pigford Black Farmer scandal.
I know about it.
Right.
From your report.
So you could make $50,000, right? I did a joke where I wanted to expose it. This is when Andrew was still alive. And I said, I'm going to do a webinar. It was a woman's farmer settlement. And I had joked with my wife once. I'd said, if I was smart, hey, honey, remember when you tried to farm? If you claimed you tried to farm, you could get a check for 50 grand. I said, oh, remember when your mom tried to farm? We were driving down the road and I was joking. So I did this webinar. And I said, I'm Dr. Lee Stranahan. I'm going to show you how to collect. And I did it. And I went through and I showed exactly what we were exposing they did. So 2 years later, I get an email from somebody. They were like, I can't thank you enough. I did that thing.
That's great.
They sent me $50,000 and I had never farmed a day in my life. All I did was I filled out the paperwork like you said to do, and I got $50,000.
That's outrageous.
I guarantee you, if my wife and I had done that, I guarantee you, we could have made, I'm not sure, but I'm not joking. I could have collected for my mother. This is the way it worked.
Yeah.
And I saw tens of thousands of people collected on that. Now, at a certain point, and like the 501c3 game, I totally get it. I've researched it enough. I understand how it works, where I completely get it. And where I take advantage of it is that I know, like if I'm in an election cycle and I'm doing video work for somebody, I know that at the end of the election cycle, I invoice for a lot more because they can't do anything with the money except spend it. And you get to a point in an election where if you got $100,000 in the bank and the election's over, it's just stuck there. It's not like you keep it. So if you're running for office, at the beginning I'll say, I'll do the video for $500, and at the end, give me 20 grand. Because if you've got 100 grand and there's 2 weeks to go, you'll go, okay, that's fine, here we go, I'll write the check. So that's what I did. That's perfectly legal. That's completely legal, but it's how the game works. But you wouldn't know that unless, like, it was investigative reporting, where I'm like, gee, why are these invoices getting bigger? That's why. Because there's all these things, like video production is a perfect example. When you fill it out for a vendor, Jason and I both done video production. Jason, what does it cost to do a commercial? And the answer is somewhere between $100 and $100,000. And the difference is certain directors will get $100,000 for yelling action and cut it. Errol Morris or whoever, documentarian like that, when he does an Apple commercial, he cashes in. And so there's no value, there's very little objective value in doing an average campaign spot. And so that's what these people have figured out. And I think that's one of the biggest, most interesting things about being a reporter for 10 years is figuring out these various scams. But periodically, I know people in journalism who, Glenn Simpson from Fusion GPS used to be a journalist. And he figured out there's more money in Oppo research, there's more, people have said to me, just go, you know how to do research. Why don't you just go become a day trader or something like that?
I wouldn't do that.
But you know what I'm saying. I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying. Like people go, if you have a research skill set,
Yeah.
that's got value. So I don't know.
One of the things I have found is my training as an investment banker, an investor, et cetera, starting out in high visibility, publicly covered deals, all over the newspaper, stuff like that. You get sued on every deal.
Yes, right.
And so
right.
you have to be right.
Right.
You have to be very, very careful and right. That's the training I have. When I get to the investigative journalists I meet, you could be a rare exception, are not that good with numbers. They're very good with words, most of them.
Yeah.
And that's how they get to be great writers, but they're not necessarily instinctively numerate. And so a lot of the brand name ones, they've interviewed me, they start up most interviews, they say, look, I'm not very good with numbers. And well, I'm glad to hear you're going to be writing a story about GE, because that's all about numbers.
Yeah, right, right, yeah.
So, but I love the work you're doing. It's an honor to meet you in person.
Oh, well, thanks so much.
And I love the approach you're taking. And I think, the world is thirsting for this type of approach. I stopped reading the New York Times. So. I think it is. I stopped reading the New York Times 20 years ago, or longer. And the Wall Street Journal I don't even like. I like stuff where you quickly synthesize something, You give the reader or the viewer a chance to check the facts. We do that on every one of our shows. We show all the sources that we're looking at for the stuff. And I love it when people come to me and say, hey, you missed this or you missed that. Maybe you should look at this differently. That's what you can do. That's what you are doing. And I think in Sputnik, you've got a very good partner.
Yeah, no, I do. They're great, and like I say, they pay me and assure me. So okay. So that's great. Well, it's been a pleasure to meet you too, and I would love to have you on the show sometime.
Anytime.
And I mean, it's a very interesting. I periodically I go, I don't know if there's a market. I think there is.
Oh, there's a market.
I'm friendly with friends. I don't know what I am, but a guy named Eric Weinstein. Eric is head of Teal Capital. Brilliant guy.
Peter Thielstein.
You'd say, yeah, he works with Teal.
Yeah.
And Eric's a mathematician, physicist, speaks 9 languages, brilliant guy. And he and I've talked about this. He's like, I don't think there's a business model in journalism.
I have one.
But I do too. But I understand why.
Right. There's so much free information that it's tough to charge people.
It's tough to write. Right. It's tricky.
Right.
And when a guy like that goes, I just don't see the business model. I'm like, I think there is one, but I have the same feeling. But I get it. So when smart people are like, and then periodically I go, maybe Eric's smarter than I am. Maybe the problem is I'm in the buggy whip business and cars have been introduced or whatever, and so.
Well, I mean, if you look, for example, at Bloomberg, that's a good clue. I spent a lot of time on Bloomberg in 2009 to about 2013 until it became globalist, and my approach doesn't fit with that.
Yeah.
But their business model is simple. You sell a machine for $20,000 a year, subscription, and you don't care how much you lose in the news business. And there are 300,000 people buying your machine for $20,000 a year. Profit margins are well over 50%.
Right.
And you're a happy camper as Mike Bloomberg. You've got you own basically, I don't know, 85% of the company.
Yeah.
And that kind of approach to
that's what we're trying at Citizen Journalism School, and we'll see.
Yeah, good.
Well, that's what I'm trying to make. That's what I'm trying to make is try to grow good journalists. That's what we're
sorry.
trying.
Tell us about the Citizen Journalism School.
It's an online citizenjournalismschool.com. It's an online self-paced thing. It's based on a real simple premise. Everyone knows journalism's messed up right now, and I think that the problem is systemic. Therefore, if you're waiting for journalists to suddenly get better, that will never happen.
Right.
We talked about Jake Tapper earlier. You've been interviewed by Jake, right? If Jake Tapper had an awakening, red pill moment, and came into work tomorrow and said, you know what? He'd be out the door by the end of the day.
Right.
So, no, it's just, I'm not joking.
At CNN.
You're right.
It's 100% true. And therefore, it's a systemic problem. It's not Jake Tapper. It's the editors and publishers and everything else.
It's the whole financial corporate structure.
It's the whole corporate
mechanism.
structure. Therefore, and it's the nature of journalism, because if I'm in Washington, D.C., and I make friends with you and you're a congressman, then suddenly I find out you're involved in something skeezy, I'm inherently torn at that point. Just, it's true. And so citizen journalists are going to be the solution to the problem, because they don't care that much. The people who live in Washington, I see this in the White House, I see this with people who are ex-colleagues of mine at Breitbart. Like, I'm not planning to stay there, so I kind of don't care who I piss off. But citizen journalists don't care at all, because they're like focused on an issue. So they don't care if they think farm subsidies are bad or corn subsidies. They don't care.
So this is something that anybody can...
Anybody can do it. I show people nuts and bolts, how to find 990s, how to go through them, how to logic, how to write, how to broadcast, how to podcast, how to do video, how to do everything. And it's an adult education, self-paced class.
And you're doing that as a 501c3 or as a business?
No, it's a business. It's a business. We should do it as we may do a 501c3.
It's charity fraud.
Adjunct. No, because there's reasons you do that.
Right.
There are reasons you do that. It allows you to get certain contributions and stuff like that.
Well,
and we have people now who sign up for memberships who don't want to go.
I'll give you one business model which is interesting. I'm very well aware of an organization called the Chartered Financial Analyst
Yeah.
designation. That's a charity. And what it is, it's a testing service, very tough test. They charge for study materials, they charge for, it's for the financial world, so it's for the smartest financial analysts to get that title if they're starting out. And I think they charge like $20,000 for the tests.
We're like $1,500 is a lifetime membership. It's like $500-600 a year, and then $1,500 is a lifetime. And that's meant on purpose.
And you're getting people?
Good.
Good.
Yeah. We're getting people. We'd like a lot more people, and it's. Again, Jason knows I taught forever. I worked in Hollywood for a long time, but I taught, and
where did you teach?
All over the place. I mean,
animation and visual effects. That's how Lee and I met. When I was a teenager and Lee was in his young 20s, he was doing a lot of videotapes about how to do this animation software, and I couldn't afford the video.
And Jason will Jason will tell you I'm a very good teacher.
Yeah.
So I was never particularly I'm not a great artist. I know people who are like
that.
Great,
I disagree with, by the way.
artists.
You've always said that, but he is great. My whole angle was I couldn't afford your video series, so I said I'll do a seminar with Lee.
The reason I say that, and it's not humility, is my brother, who you
Kenny's
also know,
exceptional, yes.
is a brilliant artist. My brother is like a painter who can copy Vermeers, and he's just a brilliant artist.
I'm not.
And I'm a good photographer. I understand certain aspects of it, but I can't paint, right? And so my brother, so that's what it is. So when I think artist, I think that dude. I think my brother.
Wait a minute. You can't paint, and you're an animation expert, and you're colorblind.
Yeah.
But what am I missing here?
And I'm blind in one eye. Here's what it is. 3D animation. I always used to say this. 3D animation. If you're like me, like you're a photographer, you've got a camera in the 3D world. So if you know composition and lighting, which I do, you could focus on that. Someone like my brother in the real world he used to build furniture.
That's cool.
So because he's got that in his brain, when he sits down to a 3D graphics program, he can build stuff. I hate that part. I like doing the lighting and moving the camera around. So 3D animation, it's so broad. It's like a filmmaking in your computer that people, and some people get into it who don't have any artistic skills, and they're just programmers. They're just coders. And so it's one of those worlds like journalism, actually. I would say it's like journalism.
Just very broad. You can.
It's very broad. Like journalism's got plenty of room for people who are research nerds or personalities or opinionated or introverts or extroverts. Like, what kind of personality do you need to be a reporter? I don't know. What do you got? I mean, you can be introverted and nerdish and bookish and super great as a reporter, or you can be an extrovert. Alex Jones, I would say, is more of the extrovert type.
Or a Loomer.
Or whatever, but you know what I'm saying. There's different types. And so I'm a good teacher because I think about the different modalities that people get into. And it's a great school. We have a variety of classes online, and it's all just all you can eat.
Well, for those of our viewers, and we now have, thanks to Jason's excellent work, quite a number of viewers. Many of you are just like I am. I started out, by accident. I had no interest in this. Actually, what I wanted to do was go to Oxford, get a PhD, and study medieval history. That's what I was thinking about doing.
A lot of money in that.
Huh?
A lot of money in that medieval history.
It's
that's
big.
It's a
big
that's
family
a big market.
business.
Yeah,
right.
You could become a knight.
Knight. I wouldn't settle for knight. But anyway, and so I've never actually had any formal training in writing. I've never taken a writing class or any of that kind of stuff. And to know that there is such a service with you, it's a great thing. And I would encourage our listeners to check out his site.
Well, that's what
what's
I
the
was
name
going
of
to
it?
say,
CitizenJournalismSchool.com.
Okay.
Perhaps you should go to Citizen Journalism School.
I never liked classes.
That's what they're good. It's video. It's online instruction. So it's videos and stuff like that.
As I said, I went to Yale. I took my junior year abroad, and then my parents were very nice to me, and they let me enter a program where I didn't go to class for my senior year.
Yeah.
And then I went to Harvard Business School directly, and 50% of your grade was class participation.
Yeah.
So my strategy was not talking in class. and just listening.
We get people who binge view. We get people because there's videos, and so some of it's just like, well, like writing.
Yeah.
Some of it is literally just like, we have computer tricks, like how when you're going through researching, how to copy and paste 20 things without flipping back and forth. Like it's that kind of
No, that's good stuff.
stupid. When I say stupid stuff, I mean you go, well, that's not being a journalist, but we cover that too. We cover finding sources and doing research.
But it's important for independent journalists because we're trying
Yes.
to get ahead with this minimal technology. I mean, here we're trying to do sort of a big news show style interview with multi-cameras, multiple
right.
people. So you need those tricks. You need
And we
those,
show people how to do that stuff. So
Yeah.
I use the media back training I have
Right.
to show people here's how what to do. And I've been a print reporter, a White House reporter, a podcaster, a broadcaster. So we really do try to show, but it's good. It is good. I'm very, very proud of it, and hopefully we'll grow another generation of journalists who will fix the world. So
Now, I know you've got very limited time, Lee, and of
Yeah, I
course,
know.
you know, Charles is way more likely to call a foot fault on George Soros than to give him $1 million. But this 501c3 thing, it's interesting to me because when I was at the press conference the other day in D.C., where you and Alex Jones were talking about this lawsuit related to the Charlottesville, who's the guy, the Gilbert?
Brandon
Gilmore. So he's a State Department employee, right? Like a.
Watch out! That's what I got sued for saying.
I see.
He is a State Department employee. Yeah.
I see.
And I'm not the only media outlet that mentioned that.
But also the thing that was so interesting is that the response from InfoWars and their lawyers was this anti-SLAPP countersuit. It's a strategic lawsuit against public participation, basically a punitive suit to shut you up, which is exactly the same thing that Robert David Steele has done to me.
Yeah.
He's engaged in fraud, and we've shown that by looking at his 990s, by looking at the fact that they're not registered with the New York State Bureau of Charities. I mean, these are facts, and they're bringing lawsuits to try to damage my reputation, to try to financially injure me, and they're rigging the lawsuit as well. They just this past week filed a motion to amend the complaint, which has now ballooned to 90 some odd pages.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm defending it pro se, but now I've got to go through this 97 pages and re-answer it. Very obviously, they're trying to put up roadblocks so that I'll stumble and screw something up on the procedure. I'm talking about this not because I'm whining for myself, because this is how they're trying to stop this kind of independent journalism, and it's a pattern.
There's a very clear pattern. And the stuff that's happened with Sputnik, the FARA, and stuff like that, the registering to foreign agent, it's all just a tool to shut it down. And to discredit it, and to go, well, it's a propaganda outlet. It's like, okay, well then dispute a fact. Should be easy then. If it's a propaganda outlet, you should be able to find things I'm saying that are wrong.
Right. Well, exactly the same thing I'm having. They've never come forward and said, oh, you're wrong. He's not doing charity fraud.
Right.
They say I'm a Mossad agent and I'm dating Patricia Negron, and that's the lawsuit. It's ridiculous.
Crazy. On registering as a foreign agent, that's a very interesting law, as you may know. And I'll just give you a little hint that the Clinton Foundation has got a very serious problem with that.
Yeah, I agree.
Serious problem.
We were talking a little before about Pinchuk and stuff, and that's a big area. Anyway, I do have to.
Well, we should have you back to talk about some more of that.
Anytime.
You've done a ton of research on Ukraine and all the things that they've done.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
We appreciate the time, Lee. It's always great to have you on. And I'm so glad that you guys got
Yeah, me
Thanks
too.
so much.
Me too. Thanks so
Great
much.
to meet you.
Really appreciate you having me on. It was great talking to you.
All right.
I always feel like I blather on this.
No, well done.
It's very good. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you soon.
I will do.